The night I found her, the temperature had dropped below freezing, the kind of cold that makes your breath sting and your fingers go numb in seconds. I hadn't even planned on stopping. I was driving home late, tired, half listening to the radio, when something small and dark near the roadside caught my headlights. At first, I thought it was a bag of trash. Then it moved. I slammed the brakes and pulled over, heart pounding harder than it should have. The wind cut straight through my jacket as I stepped out, the cold biting deep. That's when I saw her clearly. A Labrador puppy, no more than a few months old, curled into herself beside a broken fence post. She wasn't barking. She wasn't crying. She was shaking. Her little body trembled so badly her paws scraped the frozen ground. Ice clung to her whiskers and her fur looked damp, stiff with cold. She tried to lift her head when I came closer, but it dropped again like it weighed too much for her to carry. That's when I noticed her paw. Something pale was tied to it. A string, too tight, pressing into her fur, and dangling from it, a folded piece of paper. My stomach turned. Hey, it's okay, I whispered, dropping to my knees. I slipped my gloves off despite the cold so I wouldn't scare her. She barely reacted when I touched her, just let out a weak, breathy sound, not even a whimper. That scared me more than anything. I scooped her up, feeling how light she was, how her ribs pressed faintly against my arm. She pressed her cold nose against my jacket like she was trying to burrow into warmth. I held her there, close to my chest, letting my body heat reach her while my fingers shook as I reached for the note. I hesitated. Something about that piece of paper felt heavier than it should have. The ink looked smudged, like the writer's hands had been shaking too, or maybe they'd cried while writing it. The edges were damp, the paper creased and worn as if it had been folded and unfolded 100 times before being tied to her paw. I unfolded it slowly. The words were short, simple, and they absolutely destroyed me. Her name is Daisy. Please don't hate her. She didn't do anything wrong. I just couldn't keep her warm. I stared at the note, my vision blurring. I read it again and again, as if maybe the words would change. They didn't. I looked down at the puppy in my arms, Daisy. Her eyes were half closed now, heavy with exhaustion, her breathing shallow but steady against my chest. She trusted me without knowing me, trusted anyone who would stop. Anger rose in my throat first, hot, sharp, undeniable. How could someone leave a puppy out here in this cold, alone? But right behind it came something worse. Understanding. The string wasn't careless. The handwriting wasn't cruel. This wasn't someone who didn't care. This was someone who cared so much it broke them. I held Daisy tighter, my jaw clenched as the wind howled around us. Whatever story had led to this moment, poverty, fear, desperation, it ended with a tiny puppy tied to a fence in the freezing dark, and a note begging the world not to blame her. I didn't know who left her, but standing there with Daisy's freezing paws tucked against my heart, I made one decision clearly. She wasn't going to freeze tonight. By the time I got Daisy into the car, my hands were shaking almost as hard as she had been. I blasted the heat, pulled off my coat, and wrapped it around her like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't resist. She didn't lift her head. She just let out a soft, exhausted sigh and pressed herself deeper into the warmth. That sound nearly broke me. I drove straight to the emergency animal clinic, talking to her the entire way like she could understand every word. "You're okay now," I kept saying. "You're safe. I've got you." She opened her eyes once, just a slit, and her tail made the faintest movement under the coat. Not a wag, more like a reflex, but it felt like a promise. The clinic doors burst open as I rushed inside, snow clinging to my shoes. The smell of antiseptic and warmth hit me at once. A vet tech looked up, took one glance at Daisy, and rushed forward with a towel and a heated pad. "She was left outside," I said, my voice cracking despite my effort to stay calm. "It's freezing out there." They moved fast, checking her temperature, listening to her heart, warming her paws, wrapping her in blankets. I handed over the note without thinking, like it was part of her story that mattered just as much as her heartbeat. The vet read it in silence. "I'll take good care of her," she said gently. "You did the right thing." I sat in the waiting room staring at my empty hands. They still felt like her, like cold fur slowly warming. Minutes passed, then more. The ticking clock sounded too loud in the quiet room. I kept thinking about the note. She couldn't keep her warm. That wasn't neglect. That was desperation. When the vet finally came back out, Daisy was nestled in her arms, wrapped in a pink blanket that looked absurdly big on her. "She's hypothermic, but stable. Another hour out there, and we might be having a very different conversation." My knees nearly gave out. They let me sit with Daisy while she rested under a heat lamp. Her breathing had evened out, and her paws twitched occasionally as she slept. I watched every tiny movement, afraid to blink. A couple hours later, just as relief was settling into my bones, the front door opened again. A woman stepped inside, thin coat, red eyes, shoulders hunched like she was bracing for a storm. She looked around the clinic with panic written all over her face. Then she saw Daisy. She froze. The sound she made wasn't loud. It was raw, like something being torn open. "That's her," the woman whispered. "That's Daisy." I stood up slowly. The vet glanced between us, then gently handed the puppy over. Daisy stirred, lifted her head, and in the faintest, weakest way, wagged her tail. The woman collapsed into a chair, holding Daisy to her chest, sobbing openly. "I didn't want to leave her. I swear I didn't. I tried everything. I wrapped her in blankets. I kept her inside as long as I could, but the landlord, the power, I didn't have heat anymore. I thought if someone found her, she'd live." Her hands shook as she pressed her face into Daisy's fur. "I just wanted her to live." The room went silent. I realized then that this story didn't have a villain, just people cornered by circumstances too heavy to carry. The vet knelt in front of her. "You saved her by letting her go. Someone found her. That matters." The woman looked up at me, eyes swollen, shame and relief tangled together. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my baby." Daisy let out a tiny yawn between us, warm now, alive. And in that moment, I realized this story wasn't over, not even close.
The woman's name was Emma. We sat in the clinic long after Daisy had been declared safe. Emma kept one hand on Daisy's back the entire time, like she was afraid the puppy might disappear if she let go. Daisy, warm now and wrapped in layers of blankets, seemed to sense something had shifted. Her tail thumped gently, slow but steady, against Emma's arm. That sound filled the room with a quiet kind of hope. Emma told us everything in broken sentences, how she'd lost her job 2 months earlier, how the heating had been shut off when she couldn't pay the bill, how she'd slept in her coat, hugging Daisy through the nights, whispering apologies into her fur while the cold crept closer each day. "I tried shelters," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "They were full. I tried friends. Everyone said no. I didn't want her to suffer with me." She looked down at Daisy, tears dripping onto the blanket. "She deserves more than this." The vet leaned back against the counter, arms crossed thoughtfully. "We can work something out," she said. "Temporary foster, food assistance, low-cost vet care. You don't have to do this alone." Emma looked up, stunned. "You'd help her? Even after what I did?" The vet shook her head gently. "You didn't abandon her. You protected her the only way you could." Something inside me shifted then. A truth settled, heavy and clear. Love doesn't always look clean. Sometimes it looks desperate. Sometimes it looks like letting go. Over the next hour, calls were made. A local rescue agreed to help. Supplies were offered. One of the techs quietly handed Emma a list of warming shelters nearby and slipped her a cup of coffee she clearly needed. In me, I stayed. When Emma signed the foster paperwork, her hands trembled just like Daisy's had earlier that night. She kissed Daisy's head over and over, whispering her name as if trying to carve it into memory. "Be good. Be happy, okay?" Daisy licked her chin once, slow and clumsy. That was it. A few weeks passed. Daisy stayed with me during the foster period. She grew fast, stronger every day, her fur glossy, her tail unstoppable. She learned the warmth of soft blankets, the joy of toys, the comfort of never being cold again. And Emma? She visited. Every single week. She'd kneel on the floor, letting Daisy climb all over her, laughing and crying at the same time. Slowly, her shoulders straightened, her eyes brightened. She found work, she found heat, she found hope again. The day Emma came to pick Daisy up for good, she brought a brand new collar, yellow, like sunshine. She buckled it on with shaking fingers and looked up at me. I never thought I'd see her warm again. I thought I'd lost her forever. Daisy barked once, sharp, happy, full of life, and sprinted toward the door like the world was waiting for her. As they left, Emma turned back. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing the note and not judging." That night, I drove past that fence post again. The snow had melted. The road looked ordinary now, like nothing important had ever happened there. But I knew better, because somewhere nearby, a Labrador puppy slept warm, belly full, heart safe. Not because the world was kind, but because one desperate note was read with compassion. And sometimes, that's enough to save a life.